You're going to hear something I haven't said out loud in a long time. Not because I forgot it, because I wasn't sure what to do with it. There are things that happen to you in service that you just carry. You don't post about them. You don't bring them up at the barbecue. You put them somewhere quiet inside yourself and you keep moving. That's what soldiers do. But this one kept coming back, and I've decided it's time to say it. If you're the kind of person who needs everything explained before you'll believe it happened, I understand that. I used to be that person. I'm not asking you to believe anything. I'm just asking you to stay. Because what I'm about to tell you is true, and if it reaches even one person who needs it tonight, then I did the right thing by saying it. My name is Adam Mercer. I'm 41 years old. I grew up in Brisbane, and I spent a significant chunk of my adult life in the Australian Army as a medic. I've seen a lot of things in that role, a lot of things I would rather forget, some things I cannot. This is one of them. The woman sitting across from me had a notebook open on the table. Her pen was resting between two fingers. She had been writing for most of the last hour, but she had stopped now. The room was small, no windows, one light above us. The table was cheap wood with a scratch running from one corner to the middle. There was a glass of water near my right hand that I hadn't touched. She looked at me. You're saying all three of you saw the same man? Yes. At the same time? Not exactly. She waited. I looked at the scratch on the table. I knew what she wanted me to say. I also knew that saying it out loud would make the whole thing sound worse. That's the problem with true stories. The ones that sound the most unbelievable are sometimes the ones that actually happened. Tell me what you mean, she said. Who saw him first? I took a breath. I did. And you were the first to say anything? No. Why not? I looked at her. Because I thought I was seeing things. She waited. Start from the beginning, she said. So I did. I had known Captain Rafiq Malik for almost 6 years before that night. We weren't best friends. I want to make that clear. People hear a story like this and they imagine two men who spent every weekend together, knew each other's families, went to each other's weddings. We weren't like that. We served together. That might not sound like much, but it means something specific. When you serve alongside someone, you learn things about them that their own family might not know. You learn how they react when everything goes wrong at once. You learn who goes quiet and who goes loud, who freezes, who starts making decisions, who checks everyone else's gear before they check their own. Rafiq was the last one. He was quiet, not shy. There's a difference. Shy people shrink. Rafiq didn't shrink. He just chose his words carefully, the way someone does when they know their words matter. He had this way of looking at a situation for a few seconds before he responded to it. Like he was reading something other people couldn't see. He was Muslim. I knew that from the start. He prayed when he could. He didn't make a performance of it. He carried a small prayer mat in his kit, and I'd seen it many times over the years. I never had a problem with it. I was a Christian. He was Muslim. Neither of us needed to make that a problem. There were far bigger things to worry about out there. That was what I thought. Rafiq was also one of the most capable soldiers I'd worked with. He was good under pressure. He didn't waste movement. He didn't waste words. When things got messy, he got more focused, not less. People trusted him naturally. You couldn't really explain it. You just felt it. That's why I noticed the change before most of the others did. It wasn't dramatic. There was no single moment where I turned around and thought something was wrong. It came in pieces, small things that I filed away without knowing why. The first thing I noticed was that Rafiq stopped talking about home. On a long assignment, everyone talks about home. It becomes its own kind of ritual. Food, family, what you're going to do when you get back, what you're going to eat, what you're going to fix, what you're going to say to the people you love. Rafiq used to join in those conversations, not loudly, but he'd be there, he'd contribute, he'd laugh, then he stopped. One evening I asked him if everything was all right. He said yes. His voice was steady, his face was steady. I believed him because there was nothing obvious to grab onto. A few weeks later I saw him sitting alone after dinner, just sitting, not praying, not reading, not writing anything, just sitting with his hands in his lap looking at them. I walked over and asked what was wrong. Nothing, he said. I laughed. I couldn't help it. Mate, you're a terrible liar. He smiled at that, a small smile. The real kind, not the polite kind, but he didn't say anything more. Another time, one of the younger blokes made a joke about death, the kind of dark joke soldiers make because sometimes that's the only way to keep moving. Everyone laughed. It was fine. It was normal. Rafiq didn't laugh. He just looked at the ground. I noticed. I filed it away. I kept moving. That's what you do. But then he started asking me questions about Jesus. Not aggressive questions, not debate questions, just genuine ones, quiet and careful, the kind you ask when you actually want to know something. One night he looked at me and asked why Christians believed Jesus was still alive. I thought he was setting up an argument. I know how those conversations go, so I gave him a careful answer, measured, ready for a counter. He just listened. Then he said, "Do you really believe that?" "Yes," I said. He nodded, slowly. "Okay." Then he changed the subject. "I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. The first incident happened on a patrol. We were moving through a rough area after dark. I remember the ground being uneven beneath my boots. Loose dirt, dry grass. Rocks that shifted if you didn't step carefully. The air was colder than I'd expected. The kind of cold that gets into your neck if you don't keep moving. Rafik was ahead of me. 2 other soldiers were behind us. We were moving quietly. Nothing unusual. No warning signs. Then Rafik stopped. His hand went up. Everyone froze. I looked ahead. Nothing. I scanned the area carefully. Still nothing. Rafik stayed completely still for several seconds. Then he lowered his hand and we continued. Later, when we were back somewhere safe, I asked him what he'd seen. "Nothing," he said. I knew that wasn't true. His hand doesn't go up for nothing. That hand going up was a decision, and Rafik didn't make careless decisions. But I let it go. I told myself there was a good reason. Maybe he'd heard something I hadn't. Maybe he'd caught movement in his peripheral. Maybe it was a judgment call that turned out to be nothing. I had explanations ready. At the time, they were enough. That was my first mistake. The second incident happened several weeks later. I was walking toward the temporary command area when I saw Rafik standing outside it. He was staring into the distance. Not at anything specific, just out. His face looked pale, not sick pale, something else. "You all right?" I asked. He turned and looked at me. "Have you ever seen someone who wasn't there?" I thought he was making a joke. The kind of dark thing you say when you've been out too long. "That's a strange question." "I'm serious," he said. There was nothing in his voice that suggested he wasn't. I looked at him properly then. His jaw was set. His eyes were clear. He wasn't messing around. "Rafik." He looked at me for a moment. Then he said, "Forget it," and he walked inside. I stood there. I should have followed him. I should have asked him to explain. Instead, I told myself he was exhausted. We all were. Long rotations do things to the mind. Everyone knows that. I gave myself a reasonable explanation, and I walked away. That was my second mistake. The third incident was the one that changed everything. It happened during a night operation. There were 3 of us close enough together to matter. Rafik, me, and another soldier named Thomas Bell. Thomas was solid, not flashy. The kind of bloke who showed up every single day and did exactly what needed doing without being asked. I trusted him completely. We had been moving for hours. No major trouble. Nothing that suggested anything was about to happen. Then I saw a man. He was standing beyond the edge of the area we were moving through. My first thought was that he was one of ours, someone out of position. It happens. But something was wrong. He wasn't dressed like us. No uniform, no gear, no weapon. He wore a long plain garment, light-colored, something like a robe or a long loose shirt. His hair was dark. His face was difficult to see, not because of the darkness, because every time I tried to focus on it, my eyes seemed to slide away from the detail, like trying to look directly at something that didn't quite exist in the normal way. I stopped walking. I reached for my radio. Then I saw his hand. He was pointing, not at me, past me, toward the ground ahead of us. I looked where he was pointing. Nothing that I could see. I looked back at him. He was still there. Then Rafik grabbed my arm. I turned. His face had gone white. He was looking at the same place I had been looking. "You see him?" I said. Rafik didn't answer. Thomas came up behind us. "What are you 2 looking at?" I pointed. Thomas stared into the same space. Then he said something I will never forget for as long as I live. "Who is that?" None of us had told him what we were seeing. None of us had described the figure. We had simply stopped. And all 3 of us were looking at the same thing. The man raised his hand again. He pointed. This time the direction was clear. There was a narrow path ahead of us. It looked passable. Nothing obviously wrong with it, but the man was pointing directly toward it. Rafik whispered something. I didn't understand the words. Thomas said quietly, "We should stop." I agreed. We changed direction. About 20 minutes later, we found out why. I'm not going to describe every detail of what was ahead on that original path. Some things from military service should stay where they happened. I owe that to the people involved and to myself. What I will say is this. There was real danger ahead. The kind that ends things permanently. If we had continued on the path we were on, we would have walked straight into it. We didn't. We came back safely. And when we were finally somewhere secure, nobody spoke for a long time. The quiet just sat there between us. Then Thomas said, "Did you see the man?" I looked at Rafik. Rafik looked at me. Thomas continued. White clothes, dark hair. My stomach tightened. He had not been close enough to hear anything I might have described, because I hadn't described anything. I hadn't said a single word about what the figure looked like. Neither had Rafik. Rafik said quietly, "Yes, that was all." Just yes. And the three of us sat there with that word sitting in the middle of us like something heavy. After that night, something shifted between us. Not immediately. We still worked, still followed orders, still did what soldiers do. But there was something underneath everything now. A question none of us wanted to be the one to ask first. Finally, I did. Who do you think he was? Thomas looked at Rafik. Rafik looked at the floor. Then he said, I don't know. That answer bothered me more than I expected. I had prepared myself for a joke. Maybe an explanation about stress and sleep deprivation. Maybe he'd say it was something in the air or in our heads. Something I could push back on and argue with. He didn't give me any of that. He just said he didn't know. And over the months that followed, I watched him change. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't the kind of change that you can point to and say, it happened on that day at that moment. It was slower than that. He stopped making certain kinds of jokes. He became quieter in a different way than before. He started carrying a small book with him and reading it whenever there was time. Once I saw it in his hands and asked what it was. He closed it. Something I need to understand, he said. I laughed. That sounds serious. It is, he said, and that was all. He stopped joining some of the conversations he'd always joined before. He started going out of his way for people. Little things. Practical things. The kind of help you give when you're paying attention to someone else's life instead of just your own. He became more patient. That's what I couldn't square away. Because I had known Rafik for years. Patience didn't come naturally to him. He was capable, and precise, and driven. He ran a fast tempo inside himself. I knew that about him. But now he was slower, quieter, more deliberate, and I could not explain it. Then he called me. It was late. I was at home. My phone rang, and I almost didn't answer it. When I did, his voice was different from what I expected. Not afraid. Not excited. Just tired. The kind of tired that comes from carrying something for a long time. Can you meet me? We met the next day. A small cafe. Nothing special. The kind of place where people come and go and nobody pays attention to each other. Coffee machines behind the counter. The sound of plates and chairs. Normal life happening around us while we sat there in the middle of something that felt anything but normal. Rafik looked at me for a long moment. Long enough that I didn't try to fill the silence. Then he told me. There had been another encounter. Not during an operation. He had been alone. He had been praying. And then he saw the figure again. The same man. Same presence. Same face he couldn't fully make out, no matter how he tried. He said the figure had spoken to him. I didn't say anything. I just listened. He said the figure had told him, do not be afraid. I asked him what happened after that. He said he couldn't fully explain it. Then he said something that stopped me cold. He knew what I had been asking God. I waited. What had you been asking? Rafik looked down at the table. He said he had been asking God to show him the truth. Not about the war. Not about whether he was going to make it home. About Jesus. I sat with that. I wanted to help him. I genuinely did. And I genuinely believed I was helping when I said what I said next. I told him that visions weren't proof of anything. I told him to be careful. I told him that the mind under extended stress does things that feel completely real but aren't. I gave him the whole reasonable explanation in a calm and steady voice. I believed every word of it. Rafik listened to all of it. He didn't argue. He didn't push back. He just looked at me with that steady gaze of his. Then he said, maybe. I walked away from that conversation thinking I'd gotten through to him. I was wrong. After that, I started watching him more closely. Not out of suspicion, out of genuine concern. I told myself I just wanted to make sure he was okay, but what I saw didn't match the explanation I'd given him. He was calmer, not in a distant or detached way. Calmer in the way that solid things are calm, like something inside him had stopped fighting itself. He started helping younger soldiers without being asked, just quietly noticing when someone needed something and then doing it. No announcement, no waiting for thanks. He called his family more often. He apologized to someone he'd had a falling out with. That one surprised me more than most things. Rafik didn't apologize easily, not because he was arrogant, just because he was the kind of man who had very few regrets. But he went to this bloke and he apologized plainly, and he meant it. He started carrying that little book everywhere. And one morning I saw him give up his seat without being asked and without saying a word about it. Just stood up and moved, like it was the most natural thing in the world. That sounds like nothing. It wasn't nothing. I had known him for years. The old Rafik would have noticed the same situation and calculated whether it was worth the inconvenience. This Rafik didn't calculate. He just moved. I kept telling myself it was maturity, that the experience had simply shaken something loose in him and made him think more about life. That explanation worked for a while. Then it stopped working. The moment I couldn't explain him away anymore happened on a Tuesday morning. Nothing big. No vision. No voice. No emergency. Rafik was sitting outside cleaning his boots. A younger soldier walked past. The kid had clearly had a rough morning. His shoulders were down, his face was tight. He looked like someone carrying more than he could hold. Rafik looked up. He called the bloke over. They talked for maybe 5 minutes. I wasn't close enough to hear what was said. Then Rafik put his hand on the young man's shoulder. Not dramatically. Just for a moment. Then the young soldier walked away, and Rafik went back to cleaning his boots, like nothing had happened. I stood there watching him, and I realized I had never seen him do that before. Not once in 6 years. I stood there and I went back through everything I had been filing away. The questions he'd asked about Jesus, the little book, the silence, the change in his temper, the way he'd started treating people, the figure all three of us had seen, all of it. I could no longer put those things in separate boxes. It was one thing. Something had happened to this man, and I needed to understand what. So I started looking, quietly, on my own. I didn't tell Rafik. I didn't tell Thomas. I didn't even tell my wife. I just started reading. About Christian beliefs. About Jesus. About visions and what causes them. About soldiers and the psychological effects of extended service in dangerous environments. My goal was an explanation. A clean, solid, rational one that would let me close the whole subject and move on. Instead, I found more questions. And then, one afternoon, I went to a church. I hadn't told anyone I was going. I sat near the back. I expected it to be loud or pressuring. It wasn't either of those things. People were just there, quietly there. After the service, an older man sat beside me. He didn't try to sell me anything. He didn't ask me why I looked like I was carrying something heavy. He just sat down and after a moment, asked if I was okay. Yes, I said. He nodded. Then he said, "You don't have to pretend you understand everything." That sentence bothered me, because it was exactly what I'd been doing, pretending I understood, building explanations that let me stay comfortable, instead of actually looking at what had happened. I asked him why he believed Jesus was alive. He answered. We talked for nearly an hour. He didn't know anything about Rafik or what we'd seen. He didn't know why I'd walked in that afternoon. He just talked to me like a person. One thing he said stayed with me when I left. Sometimes God gets your attention before he gets your answer. I drove home thinking about that sentence. I didn't become a different man that day. I didn't walk out of there with everything sorted. But I took something with me. Not an answer, a question. And a genuine one this time. Not a question designed to end the conversation with myself. A real one. Rafik and I kept talking during this time. He knew something was shifting in me. I could tell he knew. Neither of us said it directly. But we'd known each other long enough that we didn't always need to. One evening he said something I still think about. "You don't have to believe my story." I waited. "But you saw what I saw," he said. I didn't answer, because he was right. I had been there. I had seen the figure. So had Thomas. And Thomas had described him without any of us saying a word about what we were looking at. I could stretch my way to an explanation for one person having a vision under stress. Maybe. I could stretch a bit further for two people. But three separate people describing the same figure, the same clothing, the same dark hair, without speaking to each other first, that was different. And I had been standing right there. I knew what I saw. Eventually, Rafik told me he had made a decision. He didn't make an announcement. He didn't post about it or call everyone together. He just told me, quietly, in the same way he told me most things. "I'm going to follow Jesus," he said. "I know what I saw." I asked if he was afraid. He said yes. That surprised me. Not the word itself, but the directness of it. Rafik didn't admit to fear easily. Then he smiled. "But I'm more afraid of ignoring it." That hit me differently than I expected. Because I realized I had been thinking about faith as something you arrived at when you had enough certainty, enough proof, enough explanation, when you finally had everything sorted and could say with confidence that you understood. But Rafik wasn't talking about certainty. He was talking about courage. About deciding what to do with what you had already seen when ignoring it would cost you more than following it. I wasn't ready to make that decision yet, but I started praying, privately, badly, short prayers that didn't have the right words. Sometimes I would sit somewhere quiet and not say anything at all. Just sit there and admit inside myself that I didn't know what to say. I had always thought prayer meant having the right language, something formal and correct. Now I was learning that sometimes it just means sitting in the quiet and being honest about the fact that you're lost. That was something I could do. Months passed. Rafik remained the same man in a lot of ways. He still trained, still worked, still made mistakes, still got tired and short-tempered the way anyone does after a hard week. He wasn't perfect. He never claimed to be. But something inside him had settled. Like a room that had been constantly rearranging its furniture had finally decided where everything went. I saw it every time I was around him, and I couldn't explain it away anymore. I gave my life to Jesus, not because I saw the figure again. I never did. Not because someone convinced me with an argument I couldn't answer. It happened slowly, the way most real things happen. I read, I prayed, I struggled. I asked questions and sat with the ones that didn't have clean answers. Then one night I was alone in my room, and I stopped asking God to prove himself to me. I asked him to change me instead. That was different. I had spent so long trying to understand what had happened to Rafiq that I had forgotten to ask what it was supposed to do to me. I'd been watching his story so carefully that I'd stopped noticing my own. I didn't tell Rafiq straight away. I kept it close for a while. It felt private in a way I wanted to respect. I started praying every morning before I went inside from my car. Just 5 minutes, sometimes 10. Nothing dramatic, no big performance. Just me in the driver's seat with the engine off, being still before the day started. That became part of my life. It still is. I don't see Rafiq as often now. Life moved on the way it does. People leave the service. People change cities. Families grow. Some friendships drift without either person meaning for them to. But we stayed in touch. We still do. A few months ago we were talking, and he said something that has not left me since. Do you remember the man's hand? I knew exactly what he meant. The figure pointing toward the path, toward the danger we hadn't yet seen. Yes, I said. Rafiq paused. I think I remember something else. What? He was quiet for a moment. I don't think he was pointing at the ground. I looked at him. What do you mean? He didn't answer. He just looked away. I still think about that. I think about what it means to have something pointing at you. Not at the road ahead, not at the obstacle in the way, at you. Like the thing being warned wasn't the path, it was the person standing on it. And that brings me back to the room. The woman across the table had asked me everything she came to ask. I had told her what I saw. I had told her what Rafiq saw and what he told me. I had told her what Thomas said that night, standing in the dark, describing a figure none of us had mentioned to each other. 3 soldiers, 3 separate sets of eyes. One figure, one warning, one moment none of us could explain away no matter how hard we tried. She closed her notebook. For the first time during our whole conversation, she looked uncertain. I noticed it immediately. You didn't come here for this, I said. She looked at me. No. Why did you come? She set her pen down on the notebook, and then she told me. She wasn't a journalist. She wasn't writing an article. She was the sister of a soldier who had been with us that night, Thomas Bell. My stomach dropped. Thomas. She nodded. She told me he had died several years later, not in combat, a medical problem. Something that came quietly, the way some things do, without warning. Before he died, he had written down what happened that night. Everything. He had kept it all this time and written it out, and she had found the notes after he was gone. She had come to me because she needed to know if his account was real. If what he wrote had actually happened. If her brother had spent the last years of his life carrying something true. She looked at me. Did he really see the same man? I could have made it easy for her. Just yes or no. Neat and finished. Instead, I thought about everything I had just spent an hour telling her. The table. The glass of water. The room with no windows. Rafiq's face going white in the dark. Thomas saying those 4 words without any of us prompting him. Who is that? I looked at her. Yes, I said. She nodded slowly. Then she asked the final question. Who was he? I sat there with that question. I thought about the figure, the hand raised, the warning that saved 3 lives, the face I could never quite see no matter how hard I tried. I thought about Rafiq and the years of watching him become a person who chose differently. I thought about a Tuesday morning and a hand on a young soldier's shoulder. I thought about my car and the mornings sitting still before the day started. I thought about how long I had spent trying to explain everything before I was willing to believe anything. I don't know, I said. She waited. But I know who Rafiq believed he was. She asked, and you? I looked down at the table. I thought about it properly, not quickly, not to give her something clean. Then I said, Jesus. She didn't write anything. Neither of us spoke. The word sat there in the air between us, and neither of us tried to move it. When I walked outside, it was late afternoon. The air was cooler than the room had been, sharper. Cars moved along the road without urgency. People walked past me on the footpath carrying their shopping and their conversations and their ordinary Friday afternoon. None of them knew what had just been said in that room. I stood on the footpath for a moment. That room had been nothing special. Cheap table, 2 chairs, 1 light, the kind of room you forget the moment you leave it. But I knew I wouldn't forget it, because in that room I had spent an hour saying out loud something I had carried quietly for a long time. I still don't know why 3 of us saw the same figure. I don't know why it happened when it did. I don't know why Thomas wrote it all down before he died, or why his sister found the notes, or why she found her way to me. There are parts of this story I cannot explain, and I have stopped trying to. Because I used to think that was the requirement. Explanation first, belief after. You had to understand it completely before you were allowed to say it was real. I don't believe that anymore. I think about Rafiq often. There is something I've never said to him clearly enough. I've thought it many times. I've come close to saying it, but I want to say it now, even if he never hears it this way. Thank you. Thank you for not arguing with me when I gave you every reasonable explanation I had. Thank you for letting me watch you without making me feel like I was being convinced of something. Thank you for being patient when patience didn't come naturally to you. Thank you for not making it harder than it needed to be. I don't know when I'll say those words to him directly. Maybe soon. Maybe the next time I see him. But I carry them, and I still pray, not for another vision, not for another sign, not for another figure standing at the edge of a path in the dark, just for the people I served with, the ones carrying things they never talk about, the ones who came home but left part of themselves somewhere they'll never fully describe to anyone, the ones who are fine on the outside and not fine on the inside. I know there are people watching this tonight who are sitting with something heavy, something they haven't put into words yet, something they've been carrying alone because they didn't know what else to do with it. If that's you, I want you to know something. You don't have to have it all worked out before you talk to God. You don't have to come with the right words or the right understanding. You can just sit there and be honest. That's what I did. And if you've got something you want prayed for tonight, leave it in the comments. Just a few words. That's enough. We'll carry it with you. If you want to stay with stories like this, you're welcome to stay. There are more. Some of them took a long time to be told. I used to think faith meant having an answer for every question. Now I think faith begins the moment you finally admit you don't have one, and you keep walking anyway.